Welcome to another episode of the Wholeness Wisdom podcast. My name is Erin, and I help people with self-investigation practices and methods for awakening to the truth of oneself. I'm here to share today about Carl Jung's vision of conscious, unconscious, and spirit modes of the psyche. Also, how understanding the limits of these clears the way for balance in accordance with self-realization. Ultimately, I'll be talking about going beyond this vision to support waking up to oneself at the highest level. And this is what I call living from wholeness or oneness. We'll be talking today about going further than seeking a balanced life to living from non-dual awareness or embodied awareness. Let's begin with yearning for something more. Most people are conscious of their lives and their position in life while having this nagging sense of yearning for something. Restlessness, irritability, and discontent feelings, or like something is just wrong, may be the sense of that. I maintain that this yearning is for union with Source or the divine, yearning for meaning. See, we're living in a paradox. On the one hand, we are blind to reality because our senses just cannot perceive the full spectrum of what is. And on the other hand, we are that fundamental reality in the deepest sense. So, is it possible to reconcile ourselves being in this paradox? Is it possible to make peace with this and to live in peace while being caught in that in-betweenness of not being able to perceive ourselves as reality while knowing that we are? Is it possible to find balance between these two opposing experiences? I think that it is. I really believe that it is. I've also seen a lot of peace come through this through self-investigation methods, both with myself and with other people that I work with. So I have some good reason to believe that it is. I think it's equally important to ask, do we need to spend time cultivating balance as a person or working on ourselves if we already know that there is a single ground of reality that we fundamentally are beyond the person? In other words, do we need to intervene if there is a natural unfolding that is happening? Most people know that the universe unfolds to itself. It expands without anything outside of itself to expand into. And we accept this because it is in the nature of the universe to do so. So the question is, do we need to do anything to support this unfolding? Or can we simply accept this and let things be as they are? I'd like to share Carl Gustav Jung's vision with you, and also touch on how we can apply his ideas through a lifetime of his own investigation to balancing ourselves, ultimately benefiting a whole that is far beyond the limit of the individual self. Bernardo Kastrup defines Jung's metaphysics in his book on Jung, and in that book he writes that Jung was many things: psychiatrist, psychologist, historian, classicist, mythologist, painter, sculptor, and even a mystic. But he expressly avoided identifying himself as a philosopher, lest such a label or title detract from the image of empirical scientist that he wanted to project, and to be taken seriously, he almost had to. Nonetheless, Bernardo writes, much of what Jung had to say about the psyche has unavoidable and rather remarkable philosophical implications, not only concerning the mind-body problem, one of the leading problems in science and physics today, but also the very nature of reality itself. So this is what concerns us today: how Jung's vision of psyche, how it relates to the higher order of being, can facilitate self-realization and help us go beyond the limited self to reveal, perhaps unavoidably, answers to today's questions about reality. So what are consciousness, the unconscious, and spirit? In many spiritual development circles, consciousness is spoken of as cosmic consciousness, something above and beyond the body and the mind. And that's not what we're talking about here today. I will be using consciousness as Carl Jung defined it, which is awareness of one's own mental contents. That is, any perceptual or mental content that is experienced consciously. Anything that we know, anything we can report to ourselves. In the past, I have referred to this as meta-consciousness. But today, in this podcast episode, consciousness is simply the state that we are in when we are aware of the content of our psyche. And what about the unconscious? There are aspects of the psyche that we are not aware of, but we still experience. This is the unconscious, and this is where instincts live and operate. Most of us have instinctual urges. I might say all of us. Sex, belonging, food, drink, safety. The drive to satisfy these urges is often unconscious. We see surface expressions, flirting, hunger, gathering together with others, but the underlying drive remains unconscious. Other functions are even more automatic and physiological, such as the beating of the heart, the breathing of the lungs, and the movement of the spinal fluid up and down the spine. We rely on these without conscious awareness. Yet sometimes, instinctual urges become entangled with unconscious emotions, generating a feeling of dread. To relieve this dread, many coping mechanisms and methods emerge. Take the YOLO trend. On the surface, it looks like joyful abandon, right? You only live once. Playful. But underneath, there is often vast meaninglessness. If we were to complete that sentence, you only live once, wouldn't it be, and then you die? Implied in the expression itself is the restlessness or the dread that characterizes the human condition. The YOLO trend, along with an infinitude of other coping strategies, masks that sense of dread. That dread, that fear of annihilation, running out of time, get it while you can, has no solution in material terms. So people find themselves stuck in a cycle, trying to relieve unconscious meaninglessness and emotions, fear, dread, through material means, trying to acquire something to bring relief to that hole. They seek pleasure or distraction. But eventually that sense of lack returns. The cycle is this infinite recursion because it has no built-in resolution. It doesn't come to a halt at any point, only repetition. This brings me to talk about cycles, symptoms, and unconscious drives. Cycles are driven by unconscious contents. The actions or the emotions we experience on the surface are attempts to solve the discomfort generated by these contents. These solutions are coping mechanisms, and really they are there for a positive purpose. Jung identified another aspect of the psyche beyond conscious contents, beyond unconscious contents, as spirit. So what did he mean by spirit? Spirit, according to Jung, is that which is outside the bounds of the egoic self and it transcends reason and will, personal will. It includes imagination, emotion, and intuition, so gut feelings. And its function, Jung said, is to guide the ego to confront the unconscious and integrate its contents. And integrate does not mean fix, change, or destroy. It's to bring into the whole. This is the transformation Jung called individuation. The dissolving of the gulf between separate self and whole self. So if anything is disappearing or dissolving, it is the gulf that we perceive as maintaining separation. So how do these aspects relate? Consciousness, unconscious, and spirit. I will give a personal example. So to begin again, spirit bridges the unconscious and the conscious life, resulting in an integrated sense of wholeness. So my personal example is a common coping mechanism called people-pleasing or fawning. For most of my life, whenever I found myself in proximity with an older woman, I would take a different posture in response to her. It was an unconscious fawn response. I might have called it to myself, and I did, respect. And on the surface, it really might have appeared to be that. But when the unconscious content was eventually revealed, I found it to be a repressed pattern of feeling unworthy. I felt completely unacceptable to figures of authority. And as I investigated deeper, as I opened to those unconscious contents and they emerged, a spirit guided me to be aware of what's below the surface. I found it came from belief in a mythical and judgmental God. What? Under which I would never, ever measure up. In this unconscious belief that I was holding, I was completely and inherently flawed. This was all totally unconscious. I didn't ever think about a judgmental God. In fact, if anyone had asked me, for years, I didn't believe in God, and I had no strong opinion on the topic. And for years, I was innocently respectful, making these micro adjustments to myself. And the signs that it was an unconscious content, a process going on below the surface, was that I was responding by fawning, and I was experiencing discomfort, tiredness, exhaustion after the interaction, or even before, a sense of anxiety, and generally an imposter feeling. These were very subtle, yet undoubtedly very uncomfortable for me. So when spirit guided me to become aware of the underlying repressed content, I became aware of the discomfort first, subtle sense of something wrong, and then became motivated by a curious and undeniable urge to turn into my body, into my sympathetic nervous system, and examine what was really going on. When spirit motivated me to turn inward, to listen to my body and nervous system, and listen to the contents that were coming from a deeper realm into my conscious awareness, that alone facilitated transformation. The fawning response dissolved, or I could say, the sense of separateness between the perceived self that I believed I was inherently flawed and that other person I was with dissolved. A sense of ease replaced unworthiness. So the reality and symbolism of the unconscious was very important in Jung's writing. Jung was emphatic that the unconscious is not unreal. It affects us through symptoms, symbols in dreams, in behaviors and bodily responses. And these symptoms are symbolic of the underlying process. And the symptoms are very real. When unconscious content becomes conscious, balance is restored naturally. Awareness makes integration possible. In fact, awareness is the key for integration to happen in its naturally unfolding way. It's important here to remember when talking about psyche and the greater nature of reality, that there's more going on than we consciously experience. And we do have a role in the unfolding. Awareness and curiosity, a simple willingness to peek behind the curtain and shift our relationship with reality. And it is spirit which helps us integrate what is unconscious and align with reality in a more whole way. Jung said, psyche must be given a middle or superior position. And he meant this in regard to matter or the world outside. All that we experience is known through the psyche, through being conscious of it. And science to date has no answer how consciousness arises from matter, from the objective world. And Jung did have an answer to this. And it was that consciousness is not the product of matter. Rather, matter arises alongside the experience of consciousness, both being modulations of one single field of reality. In the same way, spirit is not a product of the psyche, the mind, and not a product of the outside world. It is of a higher order still, while being of that one field. Now, I'll introduce a metaphor which really helped me understand this and integrate this understanding, and that is Jung's spectrum metaphor. Jung gave this powerful metaphor, a spectrum of light. So as we know, the whole spectrum of light doesn't only include light that is visible to us, but also light wavelengths that we cannot perceive with our eyes, but we do grant existence to. So imagine this spectrum of light in a line, and in the middle is the visible contents that we can experience. We can experience visible light right in the middle of the spectrum. And now on the left would be infrared light, which is really long wavelengths, and that would be represented by the unconscious in this metaphor. And then on the right, ultraviolet, all the way on the right, would be these really tight, short wavelengths. That would be ultraviolet light, and that's where spirit would reside in this metaphor. And right in the middle again is visible light, and that would be the conscious contents of our experience. All of this along the spectrum is light, different frequencies of the same fundamental field. So cognitive scientist Don Hoffman supports this. Our perceptions are limited. He spent an entire career, over 40 years, showing through rigorous research and experimentation that we do not see reality as it is. Our senses create the illusion of divisions and depth, and what is beyond those limits is not foreign to our base nature. Reality is more than what we can see, though we do not deny we are part of nature. So reality is more than what we can see, but we are not outside of that reality. And being what we actually are, we are acknowledging our wholeness resides beyond just the field of visible light or conscious contents. It also includes what is not consciously experienced from the unconscious realm, and what is experienced but through an intuition or a guidance, which would be the spirit realm. The spectrum is one single field, and so too unconscious, conscious, and spiritual contents are all modulations of one single field. They are not separate domains. They are like different wavelengths of one light. If unconscious states can transmute into a physical form, such as the postures, the discomfort, the experience I was having that I described earlier, then consciousness itself, wouldn't that be capable of an enormous transformation beyond just physical forms, but perhaps into even a spiritual or transcendent through the body and above and beyond the body kind of realm? I think this points to something very profound. If our sense of being, an isolated body or mind, is really just an illusion created within that limited field of visible light, if that can be transmuted into an experience of being the field of light, then if we were aware of being the entire spectrum just through living our lives, what kind of life would be possible that way, living that way? If we lived as the spectrum itself and not one single point on it, not limited to this visible field, but opening ourselves to the whole range, wouldn't that change how we interact with other people? Wouldn't it change how we experience borders, state lines, divisions? Wouldn't it change how we live? And I'm wondering, would those changes require effort, or would they be naturally emerging results from an experience of unity or embodied presence as more than just the visible side of the spectrum? So Carl Jung talked about individuation, and not much more than that. He wasn't going into the metaphysical realm or the philosophical realm of highest consciousness or embodied oneness, or these descriptions of being, living as awareness that we can get into in the non-dual field of awakening. But we can go beyond individuation. We don't need to stay limited to the individuation or the self-realization of the personal self. And coming off of what Jung was describing, which is extremely useful, he described that individuation is a natural process. It is the natural unfolding of the human person, much like the unfolding of the universe itself, the unfolding of the universe to itself. And we can go beyond that individuation process by living not only through the psyche and from the psyche and as the psyche, but from a deeper field of being. The phenomenal world, what we experience, objects, thoughts, phenomena, mental contents, is psyche. But it's not all that there is. There's also, in juxtaposition to the phenomenal experiences we have, there's also the noumenal, which is the unseen or the ever-present background or the context that we are always experiencing. And wisdom traditions have taught about this background for millennia. There is within each of us this natural unfolding wisdom, not residing inside the body, but revealing itself as our experience of morality or values, also conscience or spiritual devotion, a natural inwardness, communion with the divine. And we also encounter this realm of spirit through ceremony, prayer, symbols, synchronicity, gut feelings. And whenever we are open to something that is beyond the personal self, sometimes just sitting in silence and being open to the field in which sound occurs, so the vibrations of sound that come to our ears, are happening within a field, that is how we can experience those vibrations. We're already experiencing the field, and that would be the noumenal. It's very, very, very common to resist that out of fear of surrendering control or surrendering personal will or reason. And that itself is a doorway to this. So there is an experience of an unsolvable problem that Jung was quoted as saying is the beginning of the process of individuation. So having the experience of a problem with no solution is the beginning of that natural unfolding process. So it's good news. And also, it's important to acknowledge that Jung had suggested that psyche and matter are made of the same field, right? That same field or spectrum of light, which would be the prima materia, the original stuff. So his light spectrum metaphor can reveal that all aspects of experience are one single field. And my question here to conclude is, how does recognizing all of this support waking up to ourselves? I would say that it shows us that our experience is not confined to what we can say or what we can see, not confined to the conscious, to the ego, or to the personal. Instead, we are the whole field, unconscious, conscious, and spiritual. And just as unconscious fear can transmute into form, awareness can transmute false, limited identity into wholeness. What would it be like to not live as just one point on the spectrum, but as the entire spectrum itself? Wouldn't our lives be more graceful, feel more connected, more meaningful, not because we're trying to change or be a better person, but because living from wholeness changes us naturally and allows tensions in the system and divisions that we perceive from that limited space to relax into the whole field, to allow spirit to guide those unconscious contents to awareness so that they can integrate. I find that there's a benefit to pondering these questions. What would it be like if there were no divisions? What would it be like if there really were no others, but what I call my psyche is actually one with the world? If matter is actually arising through and as my experience, being in the world, and also not of the world, but the world being of me, awareness. These questions are meant to give an experience of disorientation or what? And I say this is a very good thing because it's questioning assumptions of our conditioned or learned beliefs. And when we question that visible field of our conscious contents, and we wonder, what more might there be just outside that field? What if I had the blinders taken off and I could just peek around the corner? What symbols might emerge? What gut feelings might point me into a slightly different direction? If individuation is the function of the psyche for the individual, what might be the function of the psyche in the whole play of the unfolding, of awakening to the universe, to oneself as the whole field, as the whole spectrum? What might be the function of the psyche regarding that? If spirit in you, intuition, gut feelings, something surpassing those ego reactions, if spirit in you initiates investigating your own inherent being, then perhaps the cosmos itself is waking up through you. And that awakening isn't about becoming something better, something more. It isn't about becoming something at all. Because the potential of all form, all possibility is on that spectrum, and you are that spectrum. So therefore, you don't need to do it. Just be it, which is being you as the one. And allowing that curiosity to flow in, the unavoidable implications of questioning what we really are. And what's the meaning? What's the purpose behind this whole play that we're in? This whole play that we're in is really not about acquiring anything, but it's about remembering what we've always been, remembering our origin and our source, which is not something in the past, but it is something present right here and right now. Light itself, the full spectrum of possibility, a light of infinite frequencies, oscillating, modulating, knowing itself through flow, through instinct, through pain, through pressure, and through opening, through relaxing and expanding. So that's all that I have here for you today. I hope that these ponderings have gestated in you, and may they continue to rustle things up. And if you're interested in more information about the wholeness work, which supports self-investigation, core transformation, or to read my blog posts with more on these topics, you can go to wholenesswisdom.com. And of course, please support this channel by liking to help these ideas reach other people. I've enjoyed connecting here with you today, so I look forward to this happening next time. Until then, be well.